All right, everyone. We'll get started with the demo today. So if you guys remember from the lecture on Monday, we started implementing the relational database. So this is the types of relationships we have between our tables. So quickly to go over the three types, we have one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. Yeah, so I'll just jump into the demo. So first, you want to go to the pre-class to-dos, download the source.zip, open that up. Okay, so just to start off, if you see, we start you off with a success response and failure response. And so this is just like a generalized response format. This way you're not typing return JSON.dumps. It also allows you to default your status codes. So if you see in the success response, it'll default to 200, which means if you just leave it blank, it'll give you the 200. And same with the failure response. If you don't do anything, it'll automatically default to 404 error. Okay. That's our app.py and then our db.py. If you guys remember, we have this singleton, which ensures that we only have one connection to the database at a time. And then, as you remember, we start off with our init function, what we call create task table. Then, as you see here, create table tasks with each element in it, ID, description, and done. Okay. So if you guys remember, there's a few other elements to this init function that we want. The other thing we're going to need to do is create. Okay. So this is all for tasks. And the idea is that a task has different subtasks. So what we're going to need to do is create a subtasks table. So I'll start off with that, and that's in our db.py. So in our init, as well as creating a task table, we're also going to want to self.create subtasks table. And then we're actually going to need to define this function. So we'll do that right here. Define, create, oops. Create subtasks, create subtask table. And the reason I'm saying subtask and not subtasks is just to keep the naming consistent with create task table. We are only creating one table. So obviously we'll pass in self and then we'll define this function here. And this is going to follow very similarly to the create task table. So I guess we'll start off with our documentation. Using SQL creates a subtask table. And then for the actual code, it'll look very similar to the create task table. We're going to actually want to execute these lines of SQL. And so it starts off with create table subtasks. And then the IDs that we're going to want in this subtasks table are, so we're going to want first the ID. As always, we need ID, integer, primary key, auto increment. We're also going to want a description. And that's just going to be text, not null. We're going to have if it's done or not. And that's also going to be integer, not null. Lastly, we're going to need to reference a task. So the idea is this is each subtask will have a single task associated with it. So would you guys what relationship do you think that is between subtasks and task if a task can have many different subtasks and the subtask will reference a single task? Yeah.
One to many.
Yeah, one to many. So one task will have many different subtasks. And so what that looks like is putting a foreign key inside our subtasks table. So what it's going to look like is task ID and then integer not null. And then we need that foreign key line because this references a different table. So foreign key task ID references tasks, and then the column name is ID. And we finish it with the semicolon. We also need our like our catch part of the try. So like in this case, it's try except and then exception as E, and then we just want to like print this out. Okay. So that's what it would look like to create the subtasks table. And so that will be what we need for our init. We want to create our task table, create our subtask table. And so those are these two functions right here. We're also going to need to get all subtasks. I think I'm supposed to code this all up at the bottom. So I'm going to move the subtasks part lower down. So we separate the tasks part from the subtasks part. Okay. Additionally to creating a subtask table, we're going to need some other functions in our DB file. So one that we always know we need is get all subtasks. So when we're figuring out what functions we need, we kind of follow CRUD. If you guys remember, create, retrieve, update, delete. And so this is creating our table. This isn't actually the CRUD of creating an item in the table. So now we're going to need the CRUD for like what's actually in the table. We'll start with getting all tasks, which is what we usually begin with. So to do that, we'll define get all tasks, pass in self, and then we'll provide some documentation. In this case, using SQL, get all subtasks. Okay. So this will follow similar format as before. Again, we want to say cursor equals self.con.execute. And then if you remember, getting everything is just select star from and the table name with a semicolon at the end. From there, we actually want to put this into a readable format. So we'll say subtasks equals, make it a list. And then now we want to put all those rows from our cursor into our subtasks list. And so that looks like for row in cursor. Oops. Subtasks.append, and then this is where we want to append all the information we have. So it's going to be a little bit long, but we have first we'll start with the ID, and that is going to have the value of row 0. Next we have a description, and that's going to have that value of row 1. We're going to have done. Oops. Done is going to be row 3. We also want to cast this to a Boolean. And so if you remember, we actually created done as an integer. And so in Python, a 1 correlates to true, a 0 correlates to false. Actually, anything other than a 0 will be true, and then a 0 just means false. So we can actually cast done to a Boolean and have 0 representing the false value. So storing it as an integer works. After done, the last thing we're going to need is that task ID. And this is going to be row. This is row 3. Okay. And then after all this is done, we're just going to want to return subtasks. Okay. So we've created our subtask table and we've created this get all tasks function. Let's go back to our app.py. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Get all subtasks. Exactly. Um, yeah, thank you for interrupting. So if you guys raise your hand and look at me, I'll stop the lecture for any general questions. If you guys have any like really specific questions, like maybe your code isn't working, we have TAs up here, so you just can like raise your hand, signal to them, and they'll come up and help you guys individually. But yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, yeah, so now we can get into our app.py. If you see, we have all our tasks endpoints. So we have create task, get task, update task, delete task. What we also need is all of these, but for subtasks. So as you see here, we have get all tasks. We're now going to also make that for the subtasks. So at app.route, in this case, we want slash yeah, so slash subtasks will be the route we want. And so this is going to be a get request. And so as you remember, if you don't specify the methods, it'll just automatically assume it's a get request. So then from here, we can just define get subtasks as a function which doesn't take any parameters. And this will just return our function that we created in db.py. So in this case, it's going to be, if you remember, the dictionary is going to look like subtasks, sorry, in quotes, followed by db dot get oops, db dot get all subtasks. And then if you guys look at this success response here, we do want a json.dumps, and this will do all of that for us. So you can see this get tasks shows one way to do that, where you create the dictionary inside of the parameters of success response, and that's exactly what we can do here. We can just say return success response, and then put this whole thing in as a parameter. And so that will automatically give us that 200 status code. So now we can try running our function and testing it in Postman. We're going to want to run Python app. Oh, I need to install the whole virtual environment. So we'll say Python -m them. And then to actually start it up, .them /vin / activate. And now we can run Python app.py. Oh, we need to install the requirements. So pip install -r requirements.txt. And then once that is done, we can do Python app.py. Okay. We'll copy this. We'll go to Postman. So here I want to make a new collection. We'll call this collection demo3. And then inside of here, I want to make a request. This request is going to be get all subtasks. And we'll give it that the right URL, so /subtasks. And if we run it, we see we have no subtasks, but it gives us that empty list of everything we've put into our table. Next, we're going to want to be able to create subtasks. So we'll go back into our code. We're going to go into db.py. And after get all subtasks, we're going to want to create all subtasks. Fine. Or after getting all subtasks, we're going to create a subtask. So create subtasks. Okay. And so to create a subtask, we're going to need some fields, not just self. So aside from self, we're going to need the description, if it's been done or not, as well as an ID. And yeah, so this ID is not going to reference the ID of the subtask itself. If you remember, SQL will handle that ID for us, but this ID is actually going to be the ID of the task that the subtask goes under, or like references. Okay, so to insert it, we'll again provide some documentation. Oops. So we're going to say insert subtask into data table. And because we're actually inserting, I'm actually going to name this insert subtask. In app.py, you can call it create subtask. That's where you're actually creating it. Here, we're just like actually inserting it into the table. So insert's more appropriate of a name. And then we're going to want to start off the same way we usually do. Cursor equals self.con.execute. And then this is where we put in our SQL code. So insert into, and the name of the table, subtasks. And then the columns that we want to insert into. So this is going to be description, done, and then task ID. And we're giving it values. And then we want to pass in 3 different values here. So if you remember, it's question mark, and the question mark for each of the values. And then this is where our semicolon goes. And then as the second parameter to this execute function, that's where we put in a tuple of what values we actually want to pass in. So that's going to be, I can do this on the next line. Description, followed by done, followed by ID. Then does anyone remember the function to actually save this to the table? Oops. Yeah. Self.con.commit. Exactly. So after this, we're just going to do self.con.commit. That'll actually save this change that we just made. And if you guys remember from whenever we insert something, we want to return cursor.last row ID. And so that'll be the ID for the subtask that we just created. Okay. Do you have any questions so far? Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Looks good. All right. So then we're going to go into our app.py and actually write the route for creating a subtask. So we'll start off with app.route again. Okay, so in this case, we're going to want to, instead of using this subtasks as the URL, this task is the subtask is going to be made under a specific task. So what we're actually going to do is make the URL tasks slash, and this is where we give the task ID. So if you guys remember the syntax for passing in an integer through the URL, it's int semicolon, the name that you want to give it, so task ID. And then you can say slash subtasks. And you always want that ending slash. And then additionally, this is not going to be a get method. So we need to specify that the allowed methods here is we want to allow posts. Okay. Then we need the function header. So define, create subtask. And this is going to get in that value of task ID. Okay. So from here, we need to actually grab the description if it's done or not. And then we already have the task ID. But from the body, which if you remember, body equals json.loads request.data. And then we can grab description from there. And so description equals body dot get description. Okay. I'm gonna just keep both of these up in case you guys want to refer to the whatever file I'm not currently working on. Okay. Um, okay, so now that we have description, we also want to get, so we're going to assume the task is not done when it gets created. So we don't need to get if it's done or not. Instead, we're just going to insert that value as false. What we do need is we need a task. And so we have the task ID. And if you look in this DB file, we already have this function of, let's see, get task by ID. So because we already have that written, we can just say task equals db dot get task by ID, and we can just pass in task ID as the value there. If there is no ID or if that ID doesn't actually match up to a task, then this is where we throw our error here. If not task, then we want to return a failure response. And if you see here, the failure response can just take in a message and it'll actually put that into the error with the message dictionary. So we can just say task not found. Okay. And then if we do have a task, then we want to okay. So then when we do have a task, we want to get the subtask. We want to create the task, and when we create the task, it'll also return us a subtask ID. So we can say subtask ID equals, and then we just wrote the function on the right here. I'll find it right here. Insert subtask. So we can say equals db dot insert subtask, and we're going to pass it in the description that we have, as well as we want to give it a value of false. And then lastly, we want to give it that task ID that we have. Okay, so now with subtask ID, we can actually get the subtask after it's been created in the database. And so the reason why we want to return the subtask after it's been created is because now it already has that ID value that SQL gives us automatically. And so we don't have to like go and find that or like add it into our dictionary manually. We can just grab it from the database itself. So to do this, we have to do db.get subtask by ID. And now we don't actually have this written yet. So we're going to have to go back to our DB file and write this in. But we'll finish this function real quick. So once we have the subtask, all we want to do is return the success response that we have. Oops. And success response. We want to give it that subtask. And we actually don't want that 200 status code because we actually created something successfully. So in this case, we can just write 201, and that'll override that default value of 200 for the success response. At this point, we need to go back into our database file and create that method of getting a subtask by an ID. So to do that, we can define get subtask by ID. This will take in self and an ID value. And then we'll put in our little bit of documentation using SQL get a subtask by ID. So again, we're going to say cursor equals self.con.execute. And now we're just writing our SQL code. And so it's just the string select star from subtasks. And then does anyone remember the keyword to add a constraint? Yeah.
Where?
Yeah, exactly. So we can say where, and we can add what constraint we want to add. So in this case, we want to say where um, task ID equals, and then we need the question mark. Okay. And then as a second parameter to execute, we need the tuple. And so this tuple is going to be ID, comma. And if you remember, the reason why we need a comma after this is because if you did not have this comma here, it would not recognize that this is a tuple. And it would just see it as just like a value. But we need a tuple to be passed in as that second parameter. Okay, and so now that we have cursor, yeah.
Um, wouldn't it be where like the ID equals that and not the task ID?
Oh yeah, so it'd just be ID equals. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Um, so that okay, so yeah, now that we have our cursor, yeah, thank you for catching that. Then we want to again serialize by going for row in cursor, return, and then this is where we make that big dictionary. We start off with ID. This equals row 0. We have description. And that's row 1. We have done. This is going to be casted to a Boolean, and this is row 2. And then we have the task ID. This is going to be equal to row 3. So that's well what we'll be getting returned. Okay. So now that that's done, this create task method is finished. Create subtask by ID. I just need to save my DB file here. Save this. Should be highlighting it. Okay, there we go. Should see it. Okay, perfect. So now if we want to rerun our app.py, so I put a slash here. We can go back to Postman. We'll create a new request. So this one will be titled create subtask. It's going to be a post. The URL is going to be slash tasks slash and then an integer for whatever task it is slash subtasks, which also means we're going to need to be able to create a task as well. So I'll add another route for creating a task. This should first get all our tasks, and so we don't have any, so we can make it a post request and add a body. So someone asked on Ed, do we need to change it to JSON or we can keep it as just a text? And so what happens is you want to keep it as a JSON because Postman has a lot of stuff that goes on in the background, and changing that value to a JSON will send this request as a JSON. And so even though it might seem the same, Postman actually does differentiate. And so then in here, we want to add the description of the task. And this could be something like do all homework. Makes it a little bit bigger. We'll send that. And if you see, we got this task. And so now we want to create a subtask. We go back to creating a subtask. That ID is 0. Then here we'll say we want a description. And so something like get all homework could have many different subtasks for example, I could say finish math homework, and that's one of the many homeworks I have to do. So here I'll say finish math homework. I'll send this off. Uh, I think, yeah, I think it starts at 1 for SQL. So this should now work. Okay. So finish math homework now has, it's not done, and the task ID is 1. Its own ID is also 1. Okay. Now, does anyone have any questions up to here? Okay. So next, we're going to want to, let's say we have a task. How are we going to get all the subtasks that are associated with that task? So in this example here, I have finished homework. And then I want to be able to see how I've broken it all down into like maybe math homework, science homework. I'll actually add a couple into my database here. So let's say I have finished math homework. I could also say finished science homework. And so now we have 2 different subtasks under that task. But how can I actually see under one task, what are all those subtasks that I need to finish before that whole task gets to be done? And so in that case, we're going to need to write a function. We'll go back into our, so in our app.py, I'll write the header. Oh, oops, where am I? Create subtask. So this is just to show like what we want this function to do. We want to be able to get subtasks. Or get subtask by task ID. So we can call it get subtasks of tasks. That's the easiest way to put it. Get subtasks of task. And this is it's going to be a get request, but we still need something else. And that's going to be, I'll come back to the route, but we know that we're going to need a task ID. So I'll put that in there. And we know what we want it to do. So we'll go back into our database file. We'll actually write what we want it to do here. So here we want to get subtasks of a certain task. So here we're going to pass in self and that ID value of the task. Then we'll have some documentation using SQL, get all subtasks given a task ID. Okay, and then we want to start off the same way. We always do cursor equals self.con.execute. And then we'll write our SQL code here. So select star from, and then the table we're referencing, obviously we're looking at subtasks. And then we need that constraint, which is where, and this is actually where we'll put the task ID equals question mark. Finish it off with a semicolon. And then the second parameter of this function is going to be that tuple. In this case, it's ID. And we just need to add that comma to make sure it knows it's a tuple. From there, we need to build that list of subtasks. So we'll start off with just an empty list. And we can say for row in cursor. And there will be appending to our subtasks list here. So subtasks dot append. And this is where we just want to add all the rows so that it's a readable format. So we'll start off with, needs to be a dictionary. Start off with ID. This is going to be row 0. Next, we're going to need the description. Row 1. If it's done or not, this is row 2. And then lastly, the task ID. Okay, and then if you remember, we're always casting this to be a bool. So we'll cast this row 2 done to be a boolean. Okay, that's what it looks like. I'll move it over a little bit so you can see all of it. Um, and so then that gets us our fully um, filled list, and then we just need to return that. Um, yeah. Okay. Oh, parentheses. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So row is obviously you're grabbing stuff, not it's not a function or anything. You just need brackets to grab what row you're looking at. So good catch. Then we just want to return subtasks. Okay. So now that we've written it in the db.py file, we have to go back into our app.py and fill this in. So for an app route that we're going to need, we're going to need, we're going to start off with tasks/tasks. And then again, we're going to need the task ID. If you remember, it's int colon task ID. And then we want to add subtask at the end. And so how is this URL different from this one? Well, this one's going to be a post, and this one, and the one that we have down here is just going to be a get. So we'll be able to differentiate between the two. And then when we actually want to write this, we are going to want to call this get subtask of tasks. So I'll add the documentation we need. It's the endpoint for getting subtasks of a given task ID. And then to write this, again, we have our success response function that we already have. So it makes it really easy to just return success response. And then in here, it's just the dictionary of subtasks with db dot get subtasks by ID. And we need to pass in, oops, we need to pass in that task ID. Okay. From this, we can just test on Postman.
Gets a task of task.
Oh yeah, sorry. Perfect. Yeah, so we can test on Postman. So this is running now. We'll first get all subtasks. So you see, we have these two that we had: finish math homework, finish science homework. We're gonna need a new request. So this will be a get request for get subtask by task ID. The route we know is the same as creating a subtask. And then we can just send this tasks /1 subtask tasks. Did I not save it? Let's rerun it.
Oh yeah, you might need a four.
Where?
Here, there's no point slash.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just missing a slash. So if you see here, now we can get all the subtasks that correlate with that ID. I'll show in Postman. I'm just going to add a few more tasks and subtasks just to show exactly how this works. So I'll add another task, play sports. And then under play sports, which has an ID of 2, we'll say get cleats, as well as go to soccer field. And then find a team to play on. Now we have three tasks under that one subtask of let's play soccer. If we go to get all subtasks, we should have 5 here now. So finish math homework, finish science homework, get cleats, go to soccer field, and find a team to play on. And then if we go to get subtask by task ID, and we change this to a 2, we can get all the task IDs or all the subtasks that correlate to that task ID. Get cleats, go to soccer field, and find a team to play on. All right, do we have any questions up to this point? Okay, if you guys don't have any questions, that's it for the demo. So if you, just to recap one more time, I'll pull up these 2 files. I want to look at db.py. So here is our create subtasks table. Can anyone tell me why this is integer not null rather than integer unique and when we would use integer unique? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So as she said, integer unique is when it's a one-to-one, because you only want one of those to be like one ID to be getting used at a time. In this case, it's a one-to-many, so we just want integer not null, so that any subtask can reference a task, and tasks can be referenced by many different subtasks. And then this is what our db.py looks like. And our app dev just, our app.py just has those routes of, move this over. The one thing to watch out for is to make sure that the routes aren't being repeated. So that's why we have this subtasks route to get all the subtasks. And then we follow this format for creating a subtask. It's the task ID slash subtasks. Had we done just tasks slash task ID, it would correlate to one of the previous functions we were in, which is get task by ID. And same with these down here. So you want to make sure that your URLs are unique and also follow the same structure that we've been teaching, because it's very intuitive to know, okay, you have a task, you have a number afterwards, and you're going to know that that's the task ID, and you have whatever follows it, in this case, subtask, to either get all subtasks. If you wanted to make a function get subtask by ID, it would just be subtask slash that subtask ID. And so you want to follow that same naming convention all the way throughout your app.py. Okay. Any last questions?